Hi, hey, I wanted to do a video while I'm in one of my greenhouses hand watering some eggplant. And that is about the land around where I live here in Idaho. And what's interesting about my location where these greenhouses are, I paid $1,000 an acre for this 32-acre parcel in 2016. Prices have shot up probably for this kind of a parcel on the order of sixfold, thereabouts, in the last 5 or 6 years. Housing in town has risen steeply as well. In fact, some locations probably tenfold, literally. And I'm not embellishing, tenfold at least since 2012. But one interesting aspect of this area is that it was predominantly settled as family farm type homesteads in the 1880s, 1890s, even 1900s. And what happened since then, particularly accelerating in the 1990s, was a consolidation of the various farm parcels by large corporate entities. For instance, the farm around where I'm at, on two sides of this property, that's owned by a Californian corporation. Now, the owner of that corporation lives in San Diego, but they have thousands of acres that they use for both ranch and farmland. And as part of that estate, there are several individual homes that used to be part of the homesteads, the individual family houses. And those families inevitably sold off to this big company. And this is kind of indicative of the whole valley. I'm not just describing my location. There's a few parcels like this here and there. Right across here, you can't really see it, but through that vent, that parcel there is still owned by a guy that inherited it from his folks. He's down in Salt Lake, about a 4-hour drive from here, but he leases it out. He still owns it though. But most of the farms here are big corporate entities. And what they do with those old farmhouses, sometimes they bulldoze them, occasionally they'll sell them, but usually what they'll do is they'll put their hired servants, their hired hands into those old homes. So what you see is this interesting phenomenon that seems to basically reflect what happened in Rome and in Greece. And what I mean by that is the citizenry owned land. And then the citizenry inevitably faced some kind of a situation that required them to sell that land. And then the citizenry ended up in breadlines or as peasants on the land that their ancestors formerly owned. That's where we are as America. And I could think of some good solutions to resolve this. But the reality is we are coming to a situation where we have a peasant class and a wealthy class. And when I was in Vermont, so I moved from Idaho to Utah to Vermont. I stayed in Vermont from 98 until 2006. And we had a 200-acre farm there while I worked as an engineer with IBM. But the reason I left was because that farm, I was making a total gross income, okay, before expenses or anything else, total gross income of $60,000 a year. And I supported 3 kids and a wife, and I supported the farm expenses. And I was paying $6,000 a year for property tax. And the cutoff to be able to reduce that was $47,000 in terms of wages, okay? And I was above that. I could have made it just fine if I didn't have these wonderful people in Vermont, the politicians in Montpelier, the capital of Vermont, passing these rules. Lots of litigation, lots of regulations, just made it insane to do business there as a middle-class individual. So what happened with my property, as with so many others, is that when we sold, it went to some rich person, some New York, Manhattan lawyer type, okay? And that's what you see across the board. So family farms get sold off because the kids just don't have the money to support, to pay for them. Particularly places like New York, the property taxes there are just outlandish, or other states like Washington State. It's just ridiculous. And the answer is, well, go on food stamps if you qualify, go on Medicaid. Well, you know, I have a problem with that. I have a problem stealing from my fellow citizens, even though I qualified for food stamps a big chunk of my life when I was earlier in my, younger family days. So what I'm getting at here is the current mechanism, the model of going on entitlements to sustain the middle class. Regardless of those entitlements, you still cannot afford the taxes. You can't own land. You can't create businesses. The people with capital and the welfare recipients are the only kind of individuals that seem to live comfortably, while the middle class gets screwed. So what I'm telling you here is there's a real incentive too. If you own land or inherit land from your folks, keep it. Because what will inevitably happen if we fail to keep that land is we cannot get it back. The reality is I could never afford that property in Vermont now. It's gone up too much. The rich people have bought it up. Poor families can't, buy things like that. So I think one of the clearest ways to avoid the inevitable conclusion of slavery, being peasants of our own land in a few generations, is if everybody owned property. If we put a cap on corporate holdings to, let's say, 1,000 acres for corporate farms, it's not very efficient, but what it does is it puts the power back into the hands of families, and it creates an incentive, an environment for kids to be able to work, to be able to improve themselves, and to have assets that they can look for generations after them. I think that's really the only solution to solve the current crisis that we face. Anyway, those are my 2 cents for today. Probably don't agree with it, but I just wanted to share that. Hey, thanks. Have a good day.